They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you how easily it can be traded for paper. For 32 years, I believed I belonged to a family. I believed that the people who brought me into this world, the people who watched me take my first steps, would be the ones to shield me from the harshness of the outside. I was wrong. The cruelest betrayal doesn't come from your enemies. It doesn't come from a stranger in a dark alley or a rival at work. It comes from the people who sit across from you at the dinner table, smiling, passing the salt, while quietly planning to erase your future. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the illusion shattered. I remember the smell of damp earth outside, and the warmth of my coffee cup against my palms. I was sitting at my desk in my small apartment, looking over some routine tax documents. My grandfather, a fierce, hard-working man who had built a small empire from nothing, had passed away 3 years prior. In his final days, he held my hand and whispered something I would never forget. "Marcus, the land is yours. Don't ever let them take it. It's your anchor." He was talking about the Valley property, a breathtaking 90-acre stretch of fertile land with an old timber lodge, nestled right at the base of the mountains. It wasn't just valuable, it was sacred. It was where he taught me how to fish, how to build, and how to survive. When he passed, his will was clear. The land was left entirely to me, placed in a structured family trust until I turned 35, though I was responsible for its upkeep and had full legal claim to its future. Or so I thought. Wanting to check on the property tax status, I logged into the county's public land registry. I typed in the parcel number, expecting to see my name listed under the primary beneficiary clause. The screen blinked. The page refreshed. The name under the ownership section didn't say Marcus Vance. It didn't even say the Vance Family Trust. It said Apex Development Group. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a sudden, sharp chill wash over me, starting from the back of my neck and spreading down my spine. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a glitch. I cleared my browser history, restarted my computer, and logged back in. The result was the same. Apex Development Group. Status, transferred. Frantic, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the mouse, I clicked on the transaction history. The property had been sold 4 weeks ago. The sale price was astronomical, millions of dollars. But the most terrifying part wasn't the price. It was the signatures at the bottom of the digital deed modification. There, written in clear, undeniable cursive, were the names of my mother and father, Eleanor Vance and Arthur Vance. Underneath their names, they were listed as sole managing trustees with power of attorney. But they didn't have power of attorney over my inheritance. They were never supposed to touch it. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the ticking of the wall clock sounding like a bomb counting down. My own parents had gone behind my back. They had taken the one thing my grandfather left to secure my life, the one piece of earth I loved, and they had sold it to a massive corporate developer. Without telling me. Without asking. Without giving me a single penny. I picked up my phone, my vision blurring with a mixture of confusion and rising panic. I dialed my mother's number. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. "Marcus, honey," her voice came through the speaker, crisp, cheerful, and completely unbothered. "I was just thinking about you. How is everything?" Listening to her casual tone made my stomach turn. How could someone sound so innocent while standing on the ruins of their child's trust? "Mom," I said, my voice dangerously low, hollowed out by shock. "I'm looking at the county land registry right now. Why is grandfather's valley land registered to Apex Development?" There was a sudden, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The cheerful ambience vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating quiet. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Marcus," she began, her voice dropping all its warmth, shifting into that defensive, patronizing tone she used whenever she was caught in a corner. "You weren't supposed to be looking at that. We were going to tell you. Your father and I, we had to make an executive decision for the family." "An executive decision?" I slammed my hand onto the desk, the coffee spilling over the edges of the cup. That wasn't your family property, Mom. That was my inheritance. Grandfather left it to me. How did you even bypass the trust? Don't raise your voice at me, Marcus, she snapped, the mask completely slipping away. We are your parents. Everything we do is for the greater good of this family. Your brother Julian's business is in trouble, and your father needed capital for his firm. You don't need 90 acres of dirt. We did what had to be done. Come to the house for dinner tonight. We will discuss it like adults. The line went dead. She hung up on me. I stared at the black screen of my phone. The room felt like it was spinning. My brother's failed business. My father's reckless investments. They had drowned themselves in debt, and to save their own skin, they had sacrificed me. They had reached into my future, stolen the only meaningful thing I owned, and sold it off like a piece of cheap scrap. As the initial shock began to fade, a dark, heavy weight settled into my chest. The sadness was slowly being replaced by something else. Something sharper. Something dangerous. They thought they could just summon me to dinner, offer me a pathetic apology or a tiny fraction of the money, and expect me to bow my head and accept it. They thought because they were my parents, I would never fight back. They thought I was weak. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. The driveway of my childhood home was lined with perfectly manicured hedges and expensive vehicles. My father's brand new luxury sedan sat right at the front, gleaming under the driveway lights. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Now I knew exactly how he had afforded that car. It wasn't through hard work or a successful quarter at his firm. It was paid for with my grandfather's land. It was paid for with my stolen future. I stepped out of my car, the cold evening air biting at my face. I walked up the stone steps, every stride feeling heavy, intentional. I wasn't coming here as a loving son visiting his family. I was coming as a ghost seeking answers from the people who had buried him alive. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The smell of roasted chicken and expensive wine drifted through the foyer. From the dining room, I could hear loud laughter. It was my brother, Julian, joking about some trip he was planning. When I walked into the dining room, the laughter stopped. My father, Arthur, was sitting at the head of the table, cutting into his steak. He looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly before he forced a rigid, corporate smile onto his face. My mother, Eleanor, immediately adjusted her posture, smoothing down her designer blouse. Julian just smirked, leaning back in his chair, swirling a glass of red wine. Marcus. You made it, my father said, gesturing to an empty chair at the far end of the table. Sit. Have something to eat before we talk. I didn't come here to eat, Dad, I said, remaining standing. I stood at the foot of the table, looking at the three of them. They looked so comfortable. So safe. I want to know how you did it. The trust was legally locked until my 35-year milestone. How did you sell my land? My father sighed heavily, putting his fork down with a loud clink against the porcelain plate. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, deliberately taking his time to show he wasn't intimidated. Marcus, look at the bigger picture, Arthur said, his voice deep and authoritative, the tone he used when he wanted to bully someone into submission. The family firm was facing a major liquidity crisis. If we went under, everything we built would be gone. And Julian's tech startup needed an emergency injection of cash to prevent bankruptcy. You are part of this family. When the ship is sinking, everyone has to pitch in. Pitch in? I echoed, my voice shaking with raw fury. You didn't ask me to pitch in. You stole from me. You went behind my back, used some legal loophole, and sold 90 acres of prime land that grandfather specifically kept away from your gambling hands. Watch your mouth. Julian interjected, slamming his glass onto the table. You're talking to our parents. And frankly, Marcus, what were you going to do with that land anyway? Grow vegetables? Build a cabin? It was wasted on you. We turned a piece of dead dirt into millions of dollars of active capital. It's called smart business. Smart business. I looked at Julian, the golden child. The brother who had been bailed out of 3 failed ventures already, always using family money, always protected from his own incompetence. It's called grand larceny, Julian. And fraud. My mother finally spoke up, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that quickly turned sharp. Marcus, let's be entirely honest here. Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind when he wrote that final trust agreement. He was old, he was sentimental, and he wasn't thinking about the survival of the Vance legacy. Your father found an old power of attorney document from a decade ago that hadn't been properly revoked. We used it to restructure the trust assets. It was entirely legal. The lawyers cleared it. It was a loophole, Mom. A dirty, unethical loophole. I said, the betrayal cutting deeper with every word they spoke. They felt absolutely no guilt. There was no remorse in this room. They genuinely believed that because they were the parents and Julian was the favorite, my life, my assets, and my wishes were completely expendable. So what happens now? I asked, looking directly at my father. Where is my share of the sale? Arthur exchanged a brief, telling glance with Eleanor. He cleared his throat. The funds have already been fully allocated, Marcus. As I said, it went to saving the firm and funding Julian's new expansion. But don't worry. We've set aside $50,000 for you. It's in a savings account. You can use it to pay off your car or put a down payment on a small condo. We looked out for you. $50,000. The land had been sold for over $4.5 million. They had given me a crumb from the feast they had stolen from my table, and they expected me to thank them for it. 50,000, I whispered. I looked down at the floor, a cold realization settling into my mind. If I stayed here, if I argued, if I screamed and shouted, nothing would change. They had already spent the money. They had automated their defenses. Their lawyers had wrapped their theft in a neat ribbon of legal bureaucracy. If I fought them directly in an open courtroom right now, they would use the firm's expensive legal team to drag the case out for years until I was completely bankrupt. Is that your final word? I asked, looking up. My face was completely expressionless now. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a hard, frozen determination. It's the best we can do, Marcus, my father said, turning back to his steak, believing the matter was settled. Take the 50,000. Be smart with it. And let's put this unpleasantness behind us. Family is family. Yes, I said quietly, taking a step back toward the door. Family is family. I turned around and walked out of the house. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, sealing them inside their house of cards. As I walked down the stone steps in the pouring rain, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I began to plan. The first thing I needed to understand was the enemy. I couldn't just lash out blindly. That's what amateurs do. If I wanted to dismantle the people who had destroyed my grandfather's legacy, I needed to know exactly how they operated, where their money was tied up, and who they owed. I spent the next 3 weeks digging into the financial dark corners of Arthur Vance's firm, Vance and Associates, and Julian's tech startup, Nexus Capital. I hired a private forensic accountant using almost every dollar of my personal savings. I didn't touch the $50,000 they tried to give me. Leaving that money untouched was my silent declaration of war. The report I received back from the forensic accountant was eye-opening. My family wasn't just in trouble, they were drowning. My father's firm had been bleeding clients for the past 2 years due to terrible management and outdated strategies. The money from my land sale hadn't just saved the firm. It was currently propping it up like a fragile wooden pillar holding up a concrete ceiling. One heavy blow, and the whole structure would collapse. And Julian's startup? It was a complete phantom. He wasn't building any real technology. He was taking investor money, spending it on lavish marketing, expensive office spaces, and high salaries for his friends, while masking his lack of a real product with doctored metrics. But the most interesting piece of information came from the buyers of my land. Apex Development Group. Apex wasn't just a random corporate buyer. They were a massive regional conglomerate run by a ruthless, zero-nonsense CEO named Victor Sterling. Sterling was known in the business world as an absolute shark. He didn't care about family dramas, he didn't care about excuses, and he absolutely loathed being lied to. I discovered that when my parents sold the Valley land to Apex, they had signed a strict disclosure agreement. To get the premium multi-million-dollar price tag, Arthur had guaranteed Apex that the land was entirely clear of any environmental or zoning restrictions, meaning Apex could break ground immediately to build their planned luxury resort. A small, cold smile formed on my face as I stared at the blueprint of the Valley land on my desk. My parents had lied to Apex. Or rather, they had conveniently omitted a massive piece of information. Information that only my grandfather and I knew. You see, my grandfather didn't just love that land for its beauty. He loved it for its history. In the northern quadrant of the property, hidden beneath overgrown brush and deep limestone caves, sat an old, abandoned late 19th century mining infrastructure and an underground natural spring system that fed directly into the county's protected public water table. Under state environmental preservation laws, any development within 1,000 yards of an active underground water source connected to the public table required a mandatory federal environmental impact study, a process that could halt construction for a minimum of 5 to 7 years. Furthermore, if certain historical structures or protected mineral deposits were present, the land could be declared a permanent conservation zone, rendering it completely useless for commercial real estate development. My parents had hidden this from Apex to close the deal quickly and get their hands on the cash. They assumed that by the time Apex found out, the development would already be too far along. Or they could blame it on an oversight. I knew exactly what I had to do, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed an ally inside the wolf's den. I reached out to a woman named Clara Vance, my father's estranged sister, my aunt. Clara had been cast out of the family 15 years ago because she refused to let Arthur control her share of the grandfather's original inheritance. She was a brilliant corporate attorney who now lived 2 states away, completely disconnected from the family toxic drama. When I called her and explained what Arthur and Eleanor had done to my trust, the silence on the line was deafening. They actually did it, Clara said, her voice trembling with an old, deep-seated resentment. I always knew Arthur was greedy, Marcus, but to rob his own son? To destroy what Dad built for you? It's sickening. I don't want to just sue them, Clara, I told her openly. A standard lawsuit will take years. They will run out the clock, burn the money, and leave me with nothing but legal fees. I want to take away the pillars holding them up. I want them to experience exactly what it feels like to have the ground pulled from under their feet. There was a long pause. I could hear the rustle of papers on her end. If you go down this path, Marcus, there is no turning back, Clara warned me, her tone sharp and professional. You will be exposing secrets that will completely ruin Vance and Associates. You will likely put your brother in a legal position he can never recover from. Are you prepared to watch your family name be dragged through the mud? I looked at the framed photograph on my desk, a picture of me and my grandfather standing on the valley land, smiling, holding a string of fish we had caught from the stream. They stopped being my family the moment they forged those trust documents, Clara, I said firmly. They are just predators who share my last name. Let's begin. The first phase of the plan required absolute silence. Revenge is a dish best served when the target doesn't even know they are standing in the kitchen. Clara and I began working late into the night, assembling a massive legal and environmental dossier. Through Clara's professional network, we quietly hired a certified independent environmental engineer to conduct a secret, non-invasive survey of the valley land. Because I still held a secondary residual claim on the trust as a beneficiary, we found a clause that allowed me to authorize land assessments without notifying the primary trustees, as long as no physical excavation took place. The engineer's findings were even better than we anticipated. Not only was the natural spring system highly active, but the old mining structures contained rare, historical masonry artifacts from the early settlement era of the county. The property was a gold mine of historical preservation and environmental protection triggers. While the engineer compiled the official report, I began setting the trap for my brother, Julian. Julian's tech startup, Nexus Capital, was currently seeking its next major round of private funding to stay afloat. He had been bragging on his social media about a massive upcoming pitch meeting with a group of high-profile angel investors. Using a shell consulting firm that Clara helped me establish, I reached out to Julian's lead investor coordinator. I presented our firm as a wealthy private equity group representing offshore investors looking to dump millions into promising tech startups. Julian, desperate for cash and blinded by his own arrogance, bit the bait instantly. He personally invited my representatives to a private presentation of his software. Of course, I didn't go myself. I sent a highly trained financial consultant who knew exactly what questions to ask. During the recorded meeting, Julian, eager to impress what he thought was a multi-million-dollar fund, made several wildly exaggerated claims about his company's revenue, intellectual property ownership, and user metrics. He even went as far as to show fabricated dashboards, clear, undeniable evidence of investor fraud. He had no idea that every word he spoke, every doctored slide he showed, was being recorded and thoroughly documented by an investment team that answered directly to me. Meanwhile, my father was preparing for the annual Vance and Associates Gala, a massive networking event where he invited his wealthiest clients to reaffirm their loyalty to his firm. This year was supposed to be his victory lap. He was planning to announce a massive new partnership with a major national logistics firm, a deal that would secure his company's future for the next decade. I received an invitation to the gala via a cold, generic assistant-written email from my mother. It was clear she sent it just to keep up appearances. She probably thought I would decline out of bitterness. I smiled as I clicked accept. The pieces were now perfectly aligned on the chessboard. My father's firm was resting entirely on the stability of his upcoming partnership. My brother's company was resting entirely on a foundation of fraudulent lies to secure new investors. And my parents' financial freedom was resting entirely on the assumption that Apex Development Group would successfully build their luxury resort on my grandfather's land. They had built a magnificent tower of greed, completely unaware that the foundation was made of sand, and I was about to pull the plug. 2 days before the gala, I took the completed environmental dossier, certified, stamped, and legally binding, and had it anonymously delivered directly to the desk of Victor Sterling, the Shark CEO of Apex Development Group. Along with the dossier was a copy of the original family trust document, highlighting the illegal restructuring my parents had performed, and a detailed letter explaining that Apex had been sold a property that was legally toxic and currently under investigation by the State Environmental Board. I knew Victor Sterling's reputation. He wouldn't call my parents to ask questions. He wouldn't give them a chance to explain. He would act instantly, brutally, and with maximum legal force to protect his company's capital. The fuse was lit. All that was left to do was watch it burn. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering chandeliers, expensive tuxedos, and flowing champagne. Soft classical music played in the background as the elite of the city's business world mingled. At the center of it all stood Arthur and Eleanor Vance. My father looked commanding in his custom-tailored tuxedo, laughing loudly with a group of prominent board members. My mother stood beside him, draped in diamonds, dripping with the confidence of someone who believed she had successfully cheated fate. Julian was nearby, surrounded by a group of young entrepreneurs, holding court like he was the next great tech visionary. I walked into the ballroom wearing a simple, dark suit. I didn't grab a drink. I didn't mingle. I walked slowly toward the perimeter of the room, standing in the shadows near the grand columns, just watching. It didn't take long for my mother to notice me. Her eyes widened slightly, and she murmured something to my father before detaching herself from the group and walking over to me. "Marcus," she said, her voice a forced whisper, her smile tight and unnatural. "You actually came. I'm surprised. I hope you aren't here to cause a scene. This is a very important night for your father." "I'm just here to celebrate the family success, Mom," I said smoothly, offering a calm, placid smile. "You told me family is family, right? I wanted to see the fruits of your labor." She looked at me suspiciously, trying to read my expression, but I kept my face entirely neutral. "Well, just behave yourself." Your father is about to go up on stage to sign the partnership agreement with the logistics group. This secures our legacy. I'm sure it will be unforgettable, I replied. A few minutes later, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly. A chime rang out, signaling the guests to gather around the main stage. My father stepped up to the podium, beaming with pride, as the crowd applauded. The CEO of the logistics conglomerate joined him on stage, sitting at a beautifully polished table with 2 leather-bound contracts open before them. Ladies and gentlemen. Arthur's voice boomed through the microphone, filled with arrogance. Tonight marks a new chapter for Vance and Associates. Through resilience, strategic reallocation of capital, and unwavering dedication, we are entering a partnership that will define our future. Before he could finish his sentence, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom were pushed open. The sound was loud enough to make several people turn around. A group of 4 men in dark corporate suits walked in, led by a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and eyes like flint. It was Victor Sterling, and behind him were 2 process servers carrying legal briefcases. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victor Sterling didn't look at the guests. His eyes were locked entirely on my father on the stage. He walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom with an unmistakable aura of absolute fury. My father stopped speaking mid-sentence. His face turned slightly pale as he saw the CEO of Apex Development approaching the stage. Arthur tried to maintain his composure, clearing his throat and smiling into the microphone. Ah, Victor. What a pleasant surprise. We didn't expect you tonight. Victor Sterling didn't wait for my father to finish. He reached the edge of the stage, nodded to one of the men behind him, and the process server stepped forward, slamming a thick stack of legal documents right onto the polished table, covering the logistics contracts. Arthur Vance. Victor Sterling's voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence of the ballroom, it carried like a thunderclap. You and your firm are officially being served. Apex Development is filing an immediate emergency lawsuit against you, your wife, and your entity for corporate fraud, breach of contract, and willful misrepresentation. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The CEO of the logistics firm immediately stood up from the table, backing away from my father as if he were radioactive. Victor, what is the meaning of this? My father stammered, his face draining of all color, his voice cracking. There must be some mistake. Let's discuss this privately in the office. There is no mistake, Sterling snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. You sold my company a protected environmental zone with an undeeded natural spring and historical preservation structures. You concealed material facts, and worse, you used a fraudulent legally contested power of attorney to steal that land from your own son's trust. The State Environmental Board has issued a permanent injunction halting all development. Our multi-million-dollar project is ruined because of your desperate greed. The ballroom erupted into chaotic whispers. Heads turned wildly. My mother stood frozen, her glass of champagne slipping from her fingers and shattering on the marble floor, the dark liquid pooling around her expensive shoes. Julian looked like he had just seen a ghost, his face completely white. But Sterling wasn't done. He looked up at the logistics CEO who was backed away on the stage. If I were you, Jim, I'd look very closely at his financial statements. Arthur Vance is broke. He used our land acquisition funds to prop up his dying firm. And now that we are freezing every single one of his corporate accounts through an immediate court order, he won't have a dime left to his name by tomorrow morning. The logistics CEO looked at the legal documents on the table, then looked at my father, who was trembling, sweating profusely under the stage lights. The deal is off, Arthur, the logistics CEO said coldly. He turned around, picked up his pen, and walked off the stage without another word. My father looked like he was having a physical collapse. He gripped the edges of the podium to keep himself from falling. His eyes scanned the crowd of his peers, his clients, the people whose respect he had spent his entire life manufacturing. They were all looking at him with disgust, horror, and pity. His legacy didn't just break. It vanished in a matter of seconds. From the back of the room, I stood by the column, looking directly at him. My father's eyes shifted through the crowd until they finally landed on me. He saw my calm, unbothered expression. He saw the slight nod of my head. In that exact moment, the realization hit him like a physical blow. He knew. He knew it was me. He knew that the son he had discarded, the son he had robbed, had been the one who engineered his public execution. The disaster at the gala was only the beginning of the avalanche. When a structure built on lies faces a heavy storm, it doesn't just lose its roof. The entire foundation collapses into rubble. Within 48 hours of the gala, the news of the Apex development lawsuit hit the regional business journals. The headline was devastating. Vance and Associates accused of multi-million-dollar land fraud, assets frozen. It was a financial death sentence. My father's remaining clients panic called the firm, pulling their portfolios out in droves. Nobody wanted their money tied up with a company whose assets were frozen by a federal judge. The firm's employees began resigning in mass numbers, leaving my father alone in an empty office building, surrounded by ringing phones he couldn't answer and bills he couldn't pay. But I wasn't done. The second domino was waiting to fall. While my father was drowning in the Apex lawsuit, Clara and I delivered the file on Julian's startup, Nexus Capital, to the state regulatory board and the primary venture capital firms he had been courting. The reaction was instantaneous. The private equity fund that had been on the verge of handing Julian a $2 million check pulled out immediately. But worse for Julian, the recording of him demonstrating the doctored user dashboards and fabricated revenue data was handed over to corporate fraud investigators. I was sitting in a small diner down the street from my apartment when I received a frantic call from an unknown number. I answered it. "Marcus, you monster. You ruined us." It was Julian. His voice was completely hysterical, stripped of all its usual arrogance and smugness. He sounded like a terrified child. "The police were just at my office, Marcus. They seized my servers. My investors are suing me for fraud. I could face jail time. Why did you do this? We are your family. You stopped being my family when you sat at that dinner table and told me my grandfather's legacy was just dead dirt, wasted on me, Julian," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any anger or pity. "You were happy to live a life of luxury paid for with my stolen future. Did you think there would never be a bill to pay for your lifestyle?" "It was Dad's idea," he screamed, trying to deflect the blame. Crying openly now. "He said you wouldn't find out. He said we would pay you back eventually. Marcus, please talk to Apex. Talk to the investors. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You have to save us." "I don't have to do anything, Julian," I said softly. "You built your company on lies and Dad built his firm on theft. I didn't destroy you. I just let the truth out of the box. Goodbye, Julian." I hung up the phone and blocked the number. A week later, the final blow landed. Clara successfully filed a petition with the probate court to have Arthur and Eleanor officially removed as trustees of the Vance Family Trust due to gross misconduct, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Because the land sale to Apex was voided by the environmental injunction and the subsequent legal settlement, ownership of the Valley land reverted entirely back to the trust. But because my parents had already spent the $4.5 million Apex had paid them, money that was now legally ordered to be returned, the court ordered the liquidation of my parents' personal assets to satisfy the debt to Apex. Their luxury cars were repossessed. Their expensive corporate office lease was terminated. And finally, their massive, manicured estate, the childhood home where they had plotted against me, was put up for public auction. They had reached for everything, driven by an insatiable greed that blinded them to the morality of their actions, and as a result, they ended up with absolutely nothing. It was a quiet, crisp autumn morning when I drove back down to the Valley property. The leaves had turned vibrant shades of orange, red and gold, covering the ground like a thick, natural carpet. The air was cool, fresh, and completely still. I parked my car at the edge of the property and walked up the dirt path toward the old timber lodge. For the past few months, the land had been a battleground of lawyers, engineers, and corporate executives. But today, the noise was gone. The court orders had been finalized. The environmental protection status had been permanently applied to the northern quadrant, ensuring that no developer, no corporation, and no greedy family member could ever touch it again. The land was safe. It belonged to me, just as my grandfather had intended. I walked up to the porch of the old lodge, running my hand along the rough timber railing. I looked out over the vast expanse of the valley, watching the natural stream sparkle under the morning sun. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced since that rainy Tuesday afternoon when my world had been turned upside down. I had won. I had taken back what was mine. But as I stood there, I didn't feel a sense of wild celebration. I felt a quiet, somber reflection. A few days prior, Clara had told me that my parents had moved into a small, rented two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. My father was completely broken, his reputation so thoroughly destroyed that no financial firm would ever hire him as a consultant. My mother had been forced to sell all her designer clothes and jewelry just to cover their remaining legal fees. Julian's startup was officially bankrupt, and he was currently serving a lengthy period of community service and probation under a strict court-ordered rehabilitation program for financial misconduct. They were alive, but the life they loved, the life of superficial status, unearned wealth, and arrogant power, was gone forever. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an old, weathered photograph of my grandfather. I looked at his kind, strong face. "I kept it, grandfather," I whispered into the quiet air of the valley. "It's still here." Betrayal is a strange thing. It cuts you open, leaves a scar that never truly disappears, and forces you to see the world through a lens of caution. It teaches you that sometimes, the people who should love you the most are the ones most capable of causing you harm. But as I looked out over the beautiful, untouched land, I realized something important. Revenge shouldn't be about becoming a monster to defeat the monsters. It shouldn't be about mindless destruction or blind hatred. True revenge, true justice, is about restoration. It's about taking the broken pieces of what was stolen from you, standing your ground, and rebuilding your future on a foundation of unshakable truth. My parents thought that money was the ultimate power. They thought that contracts, legal loopholes, and corporate status made them untouchable. But they forgot that wealth can vanish overnight. Status can turn into shame in a matter of seconds, and an empire built on deceit will always collapse under the weight of its own lies. In the end, they were left with nothing but their empty greed. And I was left with the land, the truth, and a life completely free from their shadow.